A bleak and nihilistic tale about the loss of innocence and survival, centered around a children's camping trip gone horribly wrong. This book has been described as Winnie the Pooh meets the Blair Witch. There's a serious content warning for this book because there is violence towards children and violence done by children. The Laws of the Skies by Gregoire Courtois is a brutal, hopeless, unflinchingly violent book, and I couldn't stop reading it. The story picks up right as a class of 12 6-year-olds are getting on a bus to go on a camping trip with their teacher and a few chaperones. They aren't going deep into the woods, but to a campground that's used every weekend for different educational groups for young students to get out in nature to learn about it and to appreciate it. The camping trip doesn't go exactly as planned, and I won't get into too much detail about how it happens, but the children find themselves in a situation where they pretty much have to fend for themselves. The book isn't long, so that's about as much as I'll go into the plot so I don't spoil anything. I do think the length of the book is pretty much perfect for the subject matter, and I think I finished it in 1 or 2 sittings. The book does a really good job of conveying hopelessness and dread, but it's written so beautifully that I really had a hard time putting it down. The story introduces us to a class full of kids and gets us to care about them so quickly that when things started to go downhill, I was already invested in their struggle and how they were going to possibly get out of this situation. I can understand how this book isn't going to be for everybody. Again, to reiterate, the story centers around children in extremely violent, dangerous, and traumatic situations. So if you don't think that's something you want to read about or something you can handle, then I would definitely skip this one. I think the story explores some really interesting themes like nihilism and hopelessness. There are few things as tragic as young lives being cut short before they can even experience life, and the story uses that as a way to show how quickly and indiscriminately things can end. It's made even more heartbreaking when we're taken into the mind of someone who's too young to even have a firm grasp on what life or death is as they're trying to figure out what's happening to them in real time. There are some adults in the story, and through them we get to experience themes of guilt and regret, and not necessarily regretting the choices you made throughout your life, but maybe regretting the situation it ultimately made you end up in. And there are also themes of abuse, both physical and psychological, and the effect that can have on a young developing mind. And then there's also themes of how the abused is perceived by the community and also stigmatized by it. There isn't anything in the narrative that directly suggests something supernatural or paranormal is happening. It's made clear several times in the story that it's practically impossible to get lost where the class goes camping. It's a frequently used campground that's essentially laid out in a grid, and it's within walking distance of a pretty frequently used road. Despite this, it feels like the characters are miles away from civilization, and I interpreted this as kind of a comparison to how the world can seem so big and dangerous from a child's perspective. And even though the book has some brutally violent passages that don't shy away from details, it's written in a way that's so compelling and easy to read. And the language is flowery when it needs to be, but then also matter of fact at other times. During the more exciting and action-packed sequences, the narrative will do what I like to call parallel action, and the focus will shift within the same paragraph between 2 or 3 parties going through an intense situation, and sometimes this is done using a single phrase as a through line, kind of as a way to stitch everything together, and this is done so seamlessly and beautifully it really makes the action fly off the pages. Overall, I really enjoyed The Laws of the Skies. It's a beautifully written book, even though the narrative is bleak and horrific. It's a short book, made even shorter by how easy it is to read. The themes of nihilism and hopelessness are conveyed very clearly, and I could really feel the dread of all of the characters as I was going through this book. Again, there's a serious content warning for violence towards children and violence done by children. But if you think that's something you could handle, then definitely read The Laws of the Skies by Gregoire Courtois.